Vlad, can you hear me in the back? Anyone can hear me in the back? Yeah? Yes? No? I've got half things. I've got halfers. Maybe I'm going to turn it the other way. That's better? How about better? How about better? All right, respect. Do you have the laser pointer? All right, today we're going to be picking up kind of where Professor Smoke finished on Monday regarding ritual and ritual use, thank you very much, and script, ritual and writing. Religion involves ritual, of course, but it involves a whole other set of issues beyond just ritual. And especially in the period from antiquity onward, we see an explosion, right? An explosion of writing systems develop. So that's what we're going to focus on today. What I want you to look at and really pay attention to are relationships. There's going to be a lot of different terms thrown at you today, language names, names of scripts, technologies. As I'm speaking about this, and as you leave and reflect on this lecture, consider what's significant about the mention of these languages or scripts, and then try to relate each of these to something we've done earlier in the quarter. Whether it's the period of the pristine script or more recently the alphabet. Some interesting things happen from, let's say, we can start around 700 BC and move on until about Gesundheit 700. Okay? All right. Well, there's two main points, but one has a sub-point. Okay? And the way you can think about the way religion impacts the development of script, you can think about how it impacts it directly and indirectly. So the first, I want you to think about its spread, the spread beyond the natural linguistic barriers, and how that spread utilizes an imperative for new technology to develop. Then be able to ask yourself, well, how does that technology actually impact the development of script? And then today we're going to conclude by exploring this second question. What are the theological impact or implications, and how do they impact the nature of visible language? That is to say, how do people in their religious experience, how they think about the divine, how do the consequences of that go back and impact the development of visible language, the development of script? So just to backtrack a little before I get started, I want to set up the discussion because much of the discussion is going to be rooted in a language called Aramaic. Has anyone heard of Aramaic before? 27 people? Okay. So where did you hear Aramaic? My friend, what's your name?
I'm Margaret.
Margaret, how are you doing? Where did you hear about Aramaic?
There was a language class last quarter.
So you heard about it at UCLA. Okay, it's good. I TA for Professor Langford. You probably heard about it from me last quarter. Sweet jeez. Okay. Anyone else? Yes. My friend, what's your name?
Kenan.
Kenan. Tell us.
From Syria.
From Syria. Okay. So it's a language. Generally, you say Syria or Assyria or both. Both are fine for that matter. This region here is where the Aramaic language actually probably starts around here and then fizzles down this way. Aramaic is a language that's similar to things like Hebrew, similar to things like Arabic, okay, Akkadian, other Semitic languages. It becomes a very important language around this time, when the Neo-Assyrian Empire rises. One of the reasons for that is the Neo-Assyrians, as part of their imperial policy, try to standardize language. And they adopt the discourse of Aramaic, okay? If they already weren't using it earlier. You'll probably also see it from movies and TV shows nowadays. You can see me after class if you want to get my opinion on things like that. Aramaic is an alphabetic script, okay? And if you look here at this image, what do you notice? Two interesting things. There are two guys, theoretically, they're both writing, right? One's a hipster, he's got the beard. The other is, I don't know, is this dapper? What's the term for that? Who notices something?
A hand?
Greg, you notice anything?
Is that blood in his hand?
It should be, but it's not. It's a clay tablet. If you were in my section, it would be blood. But we notice this little difference here. We always ask you, right, when we are giving you this writing assignment, to invent your own written script, well, what kind of medium are you using? Have you considered a medium? Because that may impact the development of your script. There's two different media here. There's something like this and something like that. Well, we know clay already, and we know that this part of the world is the cuneiform tradition, right? This is also the, call it papyrus or, blanking on the name, the parchment. That text is written on, what is written with ink, okay? So at the same time Akkadian is being written in cuneiform, scribes are likely writing, at least from the reliefs, these images, they're called reliefs. Or no, this is a wall painting, but there's also reliefs that have this too. They write in Aramaic. So Aramaic grows and expands. Well, not long after the Neo-Assyrians rise, the Babylonians take them over, and then the Persians take them over after that. And the Persians continue on this tradition, even though the Persian language, unlike, let's say, Akkadian's a cousin of Aramaic, the Persian language is an Indo-European language, sounds very different than a Semitic language like Aramaic. You hear these little key terms I throw out, right? Like Semitic and Aramaic, Persian. The extent of the Persian Empire actually transported the usage of Aramaic even as far away as India. And you'll have Ashoka, right? He's a king in India who even had certain inscriptions commissioned that were in Aramaic. And potentially the Brahmi script, an early Indian script, is related to this. Well, let's have a look real quick. When we're talking about, let's say, the 400s BC, Aramaic sort of looks like this. What kind of medium is this? I saw some of your projects and you turned in your assignments on a medium like this. At least one group did, right? What's this medium called?
Bark.
Say again?
Bark.
What's another way to talk about bark?
Wood.
What? Okay. Well, how would the Egyptians say it? Papyrus. Maybe they wouldn't say papyrus. Maybe the Greeks would call it papyrus, but that's right, papyrus, right? So this is actually Aramaic that's being used in Egypt. All right. Well then, like most world empires, they rise and they fall. And too, the Persian Empire falls. Afterwards, the Greeks take over. And instead of keeping up Aramaic as an official language the way the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians did to spread it so far, they use their Greek language. What this does is it takes away a state sponsorship of this language instruction, and in so doing, fractionalizes or regionalizes local versions of the script, so that it's not continually consistent, okay? And some of these I'll show you real quick are things like the square script. Sometimes you call it the Jewish square script. You can see this, if you ever pass a Jewish market or a synagogue, it will be written in this style. Nabatean, Syriac. Syriac is another word for Aramaic. And Pahlavi, which is Middle Persian. So our Jewish square script looks something like this. I'll come back to the slide in a second. Just take you through a little tour. Nabatean, these are people who lived in the desert and probably brought this writing system down to Arabia. Syriac, which is North Syrian, at least the way when we're talking about script. Okay, so those are some of the scripts. Then something happens. After the conquest of Persia, the Greek language takes root throughout the Near East. But more than just the script of Greek and the language of Greek, it's the ideas of the Greeks. Okay? The Greeks are big into this thing called philosophy, right? Any of you in the classics department know Greeks like to talk about philosophy. In the ancient Near East, however, there's a different sensibility about the questions they ask about the world, whether those are questions about the divine or they're questions about the world they encounter. All right? And so something happens when religion of the Near East encounters philosophy. Prior to this Greek period, and especially prior to this Persian period, religion is very regional, it's very local. So there's not an issue so much to make other people into who and what you are as your religious experience, right? You're a Moabite, you're a follower of Chemosh. You know, you're an Assyrian, you're a follower of Ashur. And of course, there's always other deities present, but there's a major deity who probably represents who and what you are as a local community. But by the time that philosophy and philosophical schooling comes around and clashes with religion, now you start to see religions develop a little further in terms of their focus, in terms of not so much to say converting or seeking converts, although they do that, but at least putting their ideology, their theology forward, okay? So now there is an imperative to teach from the classical period onward. And you'll see this in things like the rise of Christianity, go and make disciples of all nations. The disciple is a student, if that's a fancy word, and I like fancy. Gesundheit. Major technology at this time. What are the scrolls, right? Scrolls. You ever read the book of Revelation, the opening of the seals? It gets kind of freaky, right? With all this scroll business going on. What's the problem with scrolls? Any guesses? Yeah, do you have a guess, or do you want to volunteer?
I have a guess.
Okay. Andrew, what's your guess? Why don't you stand up and come over here? And, you know, you answer so many questions in the class. Let's see if how bright this guy really is. Come on, Andrew. Stand up. Give Andrew a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. See, an issue with a student like Andrew. In showbiz, they call this upstaging, right? I like to say, steal my thunder. Would you do me a favor and walk to the doors out there?
Walk to the door.
Well, and take this first. If you want to leave, just, no, stay, please. Yeah, Andrew stole my thunder a little bit. You can walk. The problem with scrolls kind of is just like he said, right? Don't want to raise your hand. I don't want Imran to get hit there. Anybody, thank you much. So what's the problem with scrolls? It's one page, right? It's one page. If I want to get to Psalm 149, and Psalm 6 is over where Andrew's hand is, that's going to be, what did you say?
Really unwieldy.
Unwieldy. I would have said tedious, but I think unwieldy is a little more exciting of a term, right? And that's true. If you're trying to convey a lot of data, and there's a technology issue that binds you, maybe in our day and age it can be like having 256K of RAM, versus having X amount of gigabytes of RAM, right? How much data do you have access to? Yeah, I can work back. I eventually have to give this back to the custodian people. Every year they get upset with me, and I just, trust me, it's an accident. It's okay. They're making us all look, well, huh? No, you can sit down. Thank you very much. Everyone give them a round of applause. Too impressive. I'm going to call on you again. Okay? So yeah, the problem with scrolls is you can't access data maybe as quick or in as a convenient manner as you would like, right? So what do? You have to innovate. There's a technological transition that happens. Does anybody know what a diptych is? Art history people should know it. Yes,
Like
my friend, what's your name?
Ashley.
Ashley, what's a diptych?
It's basically two pieces, like a painting separated into two separate.
So in art,
Yeah.
they're paintings typically,
Or
right?
drawings, yeah.
You know, and so there are two things separated, kind of what you see here. This, would you go with postmodern for just like black as your painting?
Sure.
Yeah? I would.
Exactly.
I'm just talking to, who was I talking to? Was I talking to Tim? I'm talking to Jody. Jody, about the Israeli Museum, like, you know, these $1 million paintings just done in black. You know. You get a lot of money for this. This is called a diptych. Oh boy, I have to untie it. Make sure it doesn't say anything naughty here. Okay. A diptych, like chemistry people, right? What does di mean? Two. Okay. So two tablets, basically. Two tablets. In the ancient days, in addition to things like clay cuneiform, right? We have this system of diptych writing, okay? Where you'd have wax on one side, and you'd have some kind of nail, stylus thing, in order to write temporarily in wax. Because what's the difference between wax and clay? Yeah, it's more malleable, right? It can be changed quicker. You know, it's more ephemeral, right? Like, once it's in stone, we have that saying in English, right? Once it's in stone, it's in stone. Once it's in clay, well, we can wipe it off right here and then rewrite if we need to, or write another message. So there's a form, there's a format, thank you, okay, that we have that maybe we could apply to the creation of scrolls. And so this leads to the invention, what's called the codex. Codex is another interesting word for something like what? What might you say today?
Book.
Or more basic, a book. Something like that, right? Okay. Well, the Christian period in late antiquity, this imperative, right? It's kind of a big deal. And we can see in one of the orders from Emperor Constantine to convey 50 copies of the sacred scriptures and have them written on prepared parchment in a legible manner, in a convenient, right, not unwieldy form, portable form. This wasn't very portable, right? I mean, I could roll it all up and tie it, and, you know, and then I could carry another one and then like have a wheelbarrow full or something, right? But if you chop them up into folios or pages, you have a more convenient system. That's going to impact the development of script. And I want to show you how. If I haven't lost the laser thing. Laser. Okay. Interesting thing about scrolls. You have a tendency toward what's called top rule. Do you see these lines here? You guys all remember white line paper from when we were growing up, before you got your iPads? This is brown lined goatskin. And the lines are on top. Okay, this is top rule. One reason why that might be the case is because these skins, right? This is not just like paper we buy at the store. This is actual animal skin. And in some cases, it's sewn together to make it longer. The scroll tradition. Skin is organic, right? Paper's organic too. It has a shelf life of X amount of years, right? But skin rots. Okay? Typically, if you don't throw your scroll upside down, especially in light of Monday's discussion, how dare you? It's going to rot from where it's making contact with something and rot its way up. So we'll have a top rule tendency during the scroll period. However, once books come around, we move to a bottom rule. So if you look at the characters really quickly, this alphabet here is called Syriac or Aramaic. Okay, Aramaic of the late antique period versus Aramaic writing during the classical period, 200 BC versus maybe 200 AD CE. They're the same letters, but writing on the bottom creates a cursive that later defines the cursive tradition in writing. Let's skip over. Okay, so I talked about the spread of Syriac into India, spreads into China as well. Here we have two of our writing systems side by side. We'll get into that. Let's talk about calligraphy instead. Do you see line rules here? You see anything? Don't see line rules? I don't either. That's why I brought it up as an example. Okay? What's calligraphy for my Greek speakers? Who's Callie? How about graphy? What's graphene mean? Say again?
That, something you like to?
Well, writing. To write. Graphene is to write. Yeah, and Callie's pretty, right? So, beautiful writing is what calligraphy means. Beautiful writing. So you see the traditions that develop now. Now writing in itself is becoming artistic, right? Not that it wasn't before, but it has a tendency now, as we produce these sacred objects, these texts, right, to carry on that aesthetically pleasing look. But we don't see any rule lines. Even looking closer here, we don't see them. So how do they get it straight? Interesting tradition. This board is a rule board with string wrapped around it. And everyone can see this, right? What you do is you end up placing your page on top of this screen and running your thumb along the impression. Okay? This is a modern / ancient carried on in the modern period, calligraphic tradition. That if you look closely, you can still see the impressions, but by the time, I think I'm killing off your zapper.
Just kind of squeeze the batteries.
Squeeze it?
Really tight.
Okay. I need a lightsaber. Okay. So anyhow, as you can see, they eventually fade. But the tradition of the bottom rule still prevails, and most of us, in most writing systems today, follow this bottom rule tradition. Right? You can even see, like for those of you who in your word processors want to use Justify, we have this tradition developing where now, in order to make things look more aesthetically pleasing to the eye, we extend letters, we extend characters. Moreover, or similar to the discussion, we're talking about theology in a philosophical world. What that does is create a need for local literature. A tradition for local literature. And there's several written scripts that developed from the Syriac, this antique period Aramaic tradition. Two we'll talk about today. First one's Armenian. We'll do a little case study in Armenian. And the second is Ge'ez, which is Ethiopic, the ancient court language of Ethiopia, Eritrea, this whole area. Okay, so let's have a look-see at Armenia, just to acquaint yourselves. I'm going to mention these two places here too. This is Georgia, and this is Caucasian Albania. Okay, it's called Caucasian Albania because these mountains are called the Caucasus, not because they look like me. All right. And here we have Armenia proper. This is this part of the world we're talking about. Okay. At a certain point in time, a man in the Armenian tradition named Mesro came to be known as the bringer of the alphabet. Does anyone know Mesrop's story? Yeah. My friend, what's your name? Andrew? Tell us about Mesro. It was a long time ago that this happened. Okay. Because it was a long time ago, right? Good thinking. Anybody else? My friend, what's your name?
Vada?
Yes, indeed. Vahejan, please tell us about Mesro.
Well, he was a monk, and the alphabet itself was invented in 405. They converted in 301, and in order, he examined various languages, script, before he actually brought it together and made the alphabet. And he actually translated the Bible into Armenian too. And
Can everybody hear what Vahe is saying?
and he brought the script to the Georgians too, and correct? No?
No, I'm just saying, why should I be here? Like, this is great. Keep going.
And the Armenian alphabet has a heavy influence on the Ethiopian alphabet too.
So they say. We can talk after class about that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's just going off.
thank you very much. That's very detailed. You said something really interesting that I want to touch on. Talking about the Armenian people converting to Christianity about 301-ish, right?
Yeah.
And this is in the Common Era. And it wasn't for another more than 100 years before they get a writing system. So how are Armenian Christians writing? Probably using Syriac or Greek when they write at this time. Okay? But they're probably not using it to write Armenian. They're probably writing in Greek, right? And Gregory Nazianzus and people like this. Well, I want to just highlight some of the stories about Mesro because the commemoration, the way that the giving, okay, listen to that verb, the way, or participle, of the giving of this alphabet is remembered as a divine occurrence, is remembered as a divine tradition. Can we dim the light for story time? How do I dim the lights? Oh yeah, story time. So, I got it. Yeah. In his teaching, the blessed Mesro endured no little hardship, for he was both reader and translator. And if someone else read when he was not present, it was unintelligible to the people, since there was no translator. Therefore, he decided to try to invent letters for the Armenian language. Putting himself to the task, he became worn out by his various attempts. It is taxing. I mean, you probably know from your assignment, right? Then the king told them of a man named Daniel, a Syrian bishop of noble lineage, who unexpectedly had come into possession of the letters of an Armenian alphabet. And when the king told them about Daniel's discovery, they prevailed upon him to do what was needful. He then dispatched a man named Bakhrich along with messages to a priest of Habel, who was an intimate of Bishop Daniel. As for Habel, upon hearing it, he hastened to Daniel and first became familiar through Daniel with the letters. Then taking them from him, he sent them to the king of the land of Armenia. The letters reached him's hands in the 5th year of his reign. Then the blessed stewards, taking the unexpectedly discovered object of their search, requested of the king young children on whom they might experiment with this alphabet. And when many of them came to be taught, the king commanded that everywhere the instruction be effected using those same letters. Thus, the beautiful one attained the noble rank of teacher and taught for 2 years with the use of the same letters. Important parts. Yet when they became aware of the fact that those letters, that is, these are the letters from the bishop Daniel, the Syrian, right, the Syriac speaker, those letters were insufficient to form all the syllables of the Armenian language, that is to say, the sounds, the phonetic repository of Armenian. Since the letters essentially proved to have been buried and then resurrected from other languages, they found themselves once more in the same anxieties and for some time were engaged in finding a solution. So then, taking Hebel with him, he went to Daniel, having been well instructed by Daniel. Having arranged in the Greek order the alphabet, you'll learn about Greek next week, of letters that had been written down long before they returned and gave it to Sahag and the great Mesrog. Oh no, too much. Too much. Down, on, off. Good. So there's a recipe going on when you're trying to broaden the scope of language, but let's say you just don't have all the phonetic sounds you want. Do you guys remember the handout we gave you in section last week with regard to the Phoenician alphabet? Some of those letters had like dots under them. There's an H with a dot, a T with a dot, right? An S with a dot, a couple other funky looking ones. Well, languages have sounds, and often the initial encounter with a writing system reflects the sensibilities of an original language, but those aren't always easily transposed onto a new language, and that's the case with Armenian, if you've ever heard it spoken. It has a lot of different sounds that are entirely different than a Semitic language like Syriac. Syriac, like Hebrew and Arabic, is written from right to left. It's in a cursive form. Greek is being written from left to right, and it's still blocky, okay? That is to say the letters aren't connected, as far as I know, at this time. So let's take our recipe. Now we break apart Syriac, like Greek, and make it Armenian. Vahe, would you read just the title?
Sharat notes.
Yeah, Sharat notes. Okay? It's not a natural sound for Aramaic. Well, in Aramaic you write it from right to left. Come on, better. This way. Armenian, you'll write it from left to right. And we see the movement in the Daniel, Bishop Daniel style. Oops, this one's here. This one's here. From Syriac to Armenian. Now, of course, Armenian is not based only on Syriac. There's letters that look even Latin and Coptic. Remember what Coptic is? It's like the J sound. It's like the Coptic Janja. And furthermore, you mentioned 2 other alphabets that were created for these neighboring peoples. So now language is getting tied to identity, right? Language and identity and script. So when you look at something, you can immediately know what you're reading. Today, if we go to any number of countries in Western Europe, say, and we're not familiar with the specific languages, we may not know which language it is, because it's all in Latin, right? But here, when we see certain characters, we immediately know which language is being talked about. If you've ever seen Georgian, and I know people who've studied Georgian just because of how funky it looks. It looks really cool. It's very loopy, not quite Klingon in its downward strokes, but it's worth studying just because of how cool it looks. Okay? And these are the regions again: Armenian Major, City, Caucasian Albania, and Iberia. This is Georgia. Okay. I'm going to shift gears real quick and look for my water. Did something. Oh, is that mine? It is. Thank you much. Appreciate it. $10? Anyway. Let's do a little review. What's the abjad or abjad? What's the abjad? Let's see who I can talk. Oh, my friend, what's your name?
Eric,
Eric. What's the abjad? What's the abjad?
isn't it like the scribes like practicing the writing, like the alphabet?
Tell me more. Tell me like about the first couple letters.
Like, are you talking Phoenician or what?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, there's like Aleph, which is like start like fox's head turned to the side, and like F, which is like I don't know how to describe it.
That's okay.
It basically translates to modern alphabet.
Yeah, right? So it's an alphabetic tradition. When things are in an alphabetic tradition, we call them an abjad or an abjad. Okay? And just as an acronym for the first part of the name. During this period, we're going to reverse engineer that. And we're going to go back, in time, but I'm going to keep the lights on this time. Okay? And we're going to look at how certain scripts go back to something more odd, like a pristine system. Going into Persia, this script, Middle Persian, actually functions almost like Akkadian, right? What do I mean by that? Well, if I were to write something in English, like, don't you know I'm loco? Okay? Do you know what I mean by that? What does it mean? Say again? Nobody knows what it means on loco? It means like I fast like a locomotive? Who said it? Crazy? Right? But what if I wrote it, don't you know I'm loco, question mark, and said, don't you know I'm crazy? Where crazy would be spelled L-O-C-O. And whenever I see L-O-C-O, in my head, I understand to read L-O-C-O, crazy. Right? We kind of do that with the logogram tradition. Right? We see a logogram for school or palace or something. And we'll read it egal for palace. Well, that's the Sumerian. We'll read it beit for the palace. The big house. So modern or Middle Persian does this. It'll take Aramaic words and add phonetic complements. Okay? So if you're saying something like of the dog or the dog's thing, you would write K-L-B-A, kalbo, in Aramaic with an A. But when you read it, you'd say sagi, right? According to the Persian tradition. From this tradition, another alphabet is created called Avestan. Has anyone heard of Avestan before? These are really hard alphabets to learn, really hard scripts to learn. This script is specifically done, I think it has 50 some odd characters to match every sound and vowel you would make because it's a record of an oral performance. There can be no confusion in how to pronounce O. Because on the top of my head, I'm not saying the top of my head, right? There can be no confusion. This is part of a religion called Zoroastrianism. Okay? And every single piece is done according to a syllable. Next we have Ethiopic. And Ethiopic is an interesting tradition because it's a tradition that probably existed before the next evolution of its alphabet came to be. This acronym ESA stands for Epigraphic South Arabic. If you were to see Arabic today, it would look one way, but in the old days, it looked more like this, like some of your writing projects, right? Interestingly, I've seen this, the loops and lines. in our writing assignments. And this is its form of the alphabet. And you can see it's an object, right? Well, what if your language doesn't flow alphabetically? What if it's more conducive to something different? Let's see how this all comes to be. The story of the Ethiopic alphabet comes when a Syrian merchant doing the Red Sea run across to India is shipwrecked off the coast of what is now Eritrea. There he's taken in and made to teach the prince. The prince becomes Christian after his tradition. And in this series of learning by a person in the West known as Saint Frumentius, or in Ethiopia as Abba Salama, okay, the writing system gets modified. Now let's look and see again real quick that route. Destination could be Malabar Coast, could probably more likely up here in North India, Pakistan area. In the Indian tradition, and we saw this kind of with the Old Persian, where we saw those A's tacked on to what was otherwise an alphabetic script, you have syllabic sounding language. So the prevailing theory is that Abba Salama came and applied certain principles, meaning he was literate in the Indian traditions. So upon hearing how the Ethiopians speak, then took, if you look at the left side here, these are all the inherited characters, basically the same as the epigraphic South Arabic, a little different, and attaches notches to them. So now ha is joined with hu, he, ha, he, etc. These little marks indicate how to pronounce the vowel. And if you were to see an Ethiopic text, UCLA has a ton, go look at them. You're here, you're paying, you might as well, okay? You'll notice this stuff. And so it turns into a syllabic system from an alphabetic system, okay? Okay, well, let's jump over to Arabic really quickly. The Arabic script develops from two different scriptural traditions. By scriptural, I mean script writing traditions, not necessarily religious scripture. There's a Western tradition and an Eastern tradition. This Western tradition is similar to what we saw called Nabatean earlier, that I showed you really quickly. And the Eastern comes from Syriac. Arabic gets, or at least the writing system of Arabic, gets spread throughout this green part of the world here. From the end of Atlantic Africa into Central Asia. People will use this writing system even though their language may sound a little different. If you've ever seen written Persian and tried to pronounce it like it's Arabic, it sounds strange, right? And vice versa. There's certain letters that just don't happen in Persian. Well, where's Arabia? We've been talking about Aramaic in this place today, right? Now we're talking about this area. Here we have Ethiopic. You can see Ethiopic on here. We're very close, but just to locate you geographically. Okay, now that we've done the nuts and bolts, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's refresh our memories. Are you ready? Emotionally? No? What's this? Right, it's not the Rosetta Stone. It's an armor palette. Is it writing? Is it only writing? What else is it?
Right.
What else is it? Any wild guesses before my finger targets somebody? Okay, well, more simple maybe. My friend, what's your name?
Alex.
Alex, what might it be? Art. Pictures. Right? Okay. So we'll take it a little further from there, from art, but that's great, right? I mean, there's something being communicated. It's not just pretty. Well, I mean, who else has decapitated things and has pretty in their home? But the message is being conveyed by, we call this tradition iconography. So who's this?
Salama.
Abba Salama, right? Mar Fermentius. So who said Jesus? Who's this? That's not upstaging because he didn't know that was coming. There's a difference, right? Iconography. I don't understand. What's going on? Why is he holding this and why is he wearing this? The question is, did Jesus walk around wearing red and blue? As cool as that may be, and as patriotic as that may be, is Jesus depicted this way in order to remember a historical accuracy about his wardrobe? Or is something else happening? Any guesses? It's okay if you don't know. Is that a guess? Guess? My friend, what's your name? Matt? Max. T-X-C.
It's create kind of like a uniform way of representing it to create an icon, that sort of way.
Okay, that's actually part of the answer. Iconography is uniform. What did I say graphene means earlier? Writing, right? So to write with an image. So in the same way, there's a certain devotion to Scripture and copying Scripture. So too we have, you said a standardized or uniform way of looking at things. This icon you could find throughout the ancient churches of the ancient world or even in Eastern Christianity. This is saying something to people who probably can't read. Right? This is called Christ the Word. The Word symbolized by the text here. The red, symbolic of humanity. The word for human in Hebrew, Adam, thought by many to be related to the word blood, or red, color red. So red is a mark of humanity. Blue, what might blue be a mark of? Penelope, what? Maybe something else? The sky. How did you think of that? That was awesome, right? Yeah, the sky, or divinity, heaven, right? So to recall the human and divine nature, a color system is used. Probably, well, that's for sure what's taught, but unlikely that that may have been the fashion. And again, iconography is important for those who are illiterate. You can see something and recognize it. It's almost, I don't want to call it anti-writing, but it's a piece of visible communication. In addition to icons, you have things called monograms. You've written that down. This is a monogram for the name of God. When you see it, you don't need to be able to read. You don't need to be able to vocalize based on certain alphabetic characters, but you can see it and know what it is. Monogram. In fact, let me see. Yeah, Theochristo, like, so you have a theta and a chi sigma at the end. Monographically signals certain words. See that like with the X and the P, the Cairo. I don't know if any of you have seen it before. Well, something's happening. And again, this is going to be tied to the last language, Arabic, I discussed. In the religious tradition of the ancient Near East, it was often thought that deities of the deceased were sometimes inhabiting either statues or stones. Many of those stones later have a certain representation. Maybe it's a personified representation, maybe it's only text. In this case, maybe it's both. And in the phase, at least of late antiquity onward, or I'm sorry, the classical period onward, there is destruction of these images that occurs in basically all of the major monotheistic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and it continues in Islam and is extended a little further. In Christianity and Judaism, they're limited to 3D or destruction of 3D imagery, whereas Islam destroys, or certain denominations look toward the destruction of 2D as well as 3D. And here we have from the Sunnah. Okay. Allah's apostle returned from a journey. When I had placed a curtain of mine having pictures over the door of a chamber of mine. When Allah's apostle saw it, he tore it and said, the people who will receive the severest punishment on the day of resurrection will be those who try to make the like of Allah's creation. So they made him cushions. Good repurposing of stuff, right? But the like of creations, okay, that's going to play heavily into how Islamic art utilizes a language like Arabic. If you were to go visit shrines or mosques, this is in Jerusalem, you'll see calligraphic tradition. I showed you calligraphy with Syriac Aramaic earlier. Now that's being extended. And when you don't represent creation, what do? Right? Well, you get creative. So how does the script then develop? The script starts to take on its own life. This is the Arabic script, this is the Arabic language behind it. Takes on its own life. Another example. These all say things, by the way, right? It's not just a bunch of squiggly lines. These are letters. This one says no, right? The beginning part of it. Okay? It almost becomes its own image at that point. Its own icon. Again, icon image, right? Different tradition, but it's an identifier in a way religion impacts script. But humans have this weird ability or knack or desire toward the creative. They find loopholes. Is this an elephant? I have one no and one yes, and 75 Right? You say no, why?
If you want to be technical, it's arranged words.
Max, why is it yes? You're both right on the money because that's the whole discussion. Technically, it's not an elephant. I mean, you may be seeing an elephant, but that's on you, right? These are just words, levelly arranged in a certain way. And you know, if your eye sees it, I don't know. Maybe you're seeing stuff, you know, or maybe it. I don't know. I'm not going to say it's an elephant and then like get the artist in trouble or anything. But I think the artist got himself in trouble. For those of you who've seen the film Pulp Fiction. Yes, Ben. Please say that was a question. You're adjusting?
What?
Your arm went up.
Yeah, I thought you said you couldn't see the movie Pulp Fiction.
I Okay, fair enough. Fair. You saw Pulp Fiction. I was anticipating the question. I thought you were gonna.
Have you seen Pulp Fiction?
Dude, I saw Pulp Fiction before you were born. Man, I was at the diner with Jules. As a matter of fact, the text corresponds to what the movie calls Ezekiel 25:17. If you go open your Bibles and read that, it won't say this as sinister and cold-blooded it is in the film. And yet, is it Vincent Vega and Jules Winfield?
Yes.
Who? What? Yes? No? Who said maybe? You said maybe? He says yes. Are there any no's? Somebody say no, because then they'll tell me you understand why I'm doing it. I just saw a tumbleweed roll by. Sarah said no. Thank you. Save the day. Why is it no?
Because it's still like you're just arranging the letters. It's
Just-
not actually drawing.
Boom, that's it. Okay? This happens due to certain theological suppositions. Do any of you have any questions about the general discussion of where we've gone from the ritual tradition on Monday to the religious tradition today? How religion impacts script and develops, produces script. Think about this time period, right? Basically, from late antiquity onward, you have so many more scripts developed. Because today in our world, we see all sorts of scripts going on, but during the pristine period, it's a little more limited. Any more questions? If you have any further questions about the topic, thank you.